Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Ayman for another entry in the James Cameron Retrospective. And tonight we are reviewing Terminator 2 Judgment Day, released in 1991 and often regarded as one of the greatest sequels of all time. Something we're going to probably dive into ourselves and have a chat about. But first of all, Ayman, how are you doing tonight?
Not too bad. It's getting cold again, but apart from that, can't complain.
Excellent. And I think what's going to be fun with this one is when we announced this series, you sort of messaged me straight away
Yeah,
saying you want to get on T2, which we'll get into that as well and the behind the scenes. But we want to hear from everybody at home. So please do comment below with your thoughts on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. If you're a fan of all of the Terminator films, maybe not just Terminator 1 or Terminator 2, maybe you enjoy the ones that came after, maybe you didn't. Let us know all of your thoughts. We'll reply to them in the comments when they're done. And if you like this video, if you like this series, we've got a couple more episodes, please do consider hitting that subscribe button because it's been fun talking James Cameron. We spent a whole year on Spielberg. We've had a couple of weeks of James Cameron, a very different filmmaker, very different stories about being on set and everything else. And it's made for some really interesting stuff, so do get involved. We want to hear from you. And you want to find out more about our videos, what else is coming up, go get us on our social medias. Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema savvy. And we have a link to Redbubble in that description below. But aside from that, Aim, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think you know what's going to kind of follow. Everyone that jumps on this series, we ask them, can they remember the first James Cameron film they saw, or maybe their memories with his work? But I'll just hand that over to you.
I think T2 was the first James Cameron film I saw. Because it was I I watched Terminator 1 after I'd watched Terminator 2. Weirdly enough, but yeah, T2 was probably the first one that I ever watched from James Cameron.
Excellent. And I think that's going to be something I speak about as well, that everyone seems to have watched Terminators in different orders. I know that
Mm.
now there's a lot more Terminator films than when we were younger. I think there's that running joke that they've tried to make Terminator 3 like 4 times,
Mm.
which is kind of sad. But we're going to talk about that because there is an alternate ending that we want to talk
Mm.
about and bring up. But for everyone at home, we have the IMDb plot synopsis, and it's nice and easy for this one. A cyborg identical to the one who fails to kill Sarah Connor must now protect her 10-year-old son John from an even more advanced and powerful cyborg. Obviously, that is the T-1000, which we're going to get into. One of the
Mm.
greatest creations in the history of cinema in terms of what the industry's done following on from that. But firstly, I'm kind of following up what you said a minute ago. We want to get everyone's memories of the film. Can you remember that first time you saw this, or is it something you maybe like just grew up with as a whole?
It's one of the films I grew up with. I mean, there's three films I remember from my childhood when I was like a kid, like between like 5 and 10. It's Terminator 2, the original RoboCop, and Starship Troopers. Those are the three films I remember from my childhood, um, which probably explains why my childhood was a bit more different than everyone else's, considering those films. Um, but yeah, T2 was the main one that I remember. My granddad had it on videotape when videotapes were a thing. So it would always be that was on most of the time anyway.
No, and I think that's something we're going to be not just talking about with this, but with James Cameron. There's so many different ways to buy his films. Sometimes it's so few of them, and kind of following that with T2 for me as well. This is a weird one for me. I think I saw Terminator. I say last. Hold on. When I saw Terminator 2, there had been the three main Terminator films and Terminator Salvation. And I believe I
Um,
saw this last. I think the viewing order of me seeing all these Terminator films, and I don't know why, I definitely saw the first Terminator first on E4 back in the day.
hmm.
I distinctly being remember given a copy of Terminator 3 by one of my neighbours, which I remember watching. Um, and I think I watched Terminator Salvation before Terminator
Oh,
2. Because when Salvation came out, that was what, '09, and I
that
remember
yeah.
when we were at school. We didn't all go together, but I remember a lot of people went from school to watch that film, and I distinctly remember the PlayStation 3 game because
Hmm.
it was like the easiest platinum in history at the time, which I got
Yeah.
very quickly, easily. But I don't think I watched Terminator 2 till I was like 15, 16, which it
Yeah,
was
that.
strange because it's like the best one by a country, not best by a country mile, but T1 and T2 are like their own thing
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms
they're
of
very close.
quality.
Mm,
And that's why it's strange it took me so long. And I think it would have been when I was at college that, like a lot of people, like when I was studying film, I went through a patch. I just kept buying more and more films, which I still do now.
mm,
But when I was at college, I was actually able to watch them as I'd buy them. And
yeah,
I think I bought the first three Terminators properly. And then I must have just gone and done one, two, and three. And obviously, I
mm,
knew Terminator 2's imagery, the shotgun, the motorbike stuff, the T1000 through the bars. Like the
mm.
imagery was there, but I'd never seen it. So when I saw it for that first time, I loved it. And I'm going to be honest, I think this was only the second or third time I've ever seen the film this week. Um, I must have seen it more than once, but
Mm,
I couldn't tell you last time I saw it. What I can tell you is that I haven't watched a Terminator film since Terminator Genesis until we started this series with the first Terminator a couple of weeks ago because that was 7 years ago. That film now,
is
and
that
I've
the
still not
latest
seen
one?
Dark Fate. No, 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 no.
Oh,
That was
Dark
the
Fate. Okay, yeah,
Emilia
Dark
Clarke one,
Fate. Yeah.
and this is it kind of it now because I didn't see Dark Fate. Not like boycott. I just didn't see it at the cinema. It's just one I
Mm,
missed, and I'd heard mixed things, and I just never cared to watch it. I've kind of been inclined to go to it, so I might do it after this review, not tonight, but maybe some point
yeah.
this week because uh, Gabrielle Luna. Oh god, sorry, I got mixed up with Vandal then. No, sorry, Gabrielle Luna, yes, who is in Last of Us playing Tommy. Um, I believe is the T1000 or the new version of the T1000 or whatever they did to that film.
Um,
Um,
yeah. She's not a T1000, but yeah, it's hard to explain without like spoiling it. Um,
yeah,
it's
don't say.
weird.
Not that I care, but I'm gonna probably watch it to try and find out what changed and what didn't. So,
Yeah.
but it's just interesting with the whole. Everyone seems to have a different history with the Terminator, and it's kind of sad that when you look at the highs of I hate saying stuff like this, but like it's 30 years old this film now,
Mm,
and it's kind of a shame that there's been four films since, and it's
yeah.
dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. Like even the box offices have gone down.
Mm,
Not that money's the only be all and end all, but we're probably never going to get another one. And doing this as a James Cameron series, it's when I remember when Terminator Genesis came out, they had James Cameron all over the marketing, and I remember him saying, "This is the true, authentic Terminator 3."
mm,
And a lot of neutrals, not me, a lot of neutrals like were all buzzing for that film because of that, and obviously it failed. And then I believe for Dark Fate, he was actually involved in the story,
mm,
which is why they were broken even more with how that film went. So listen, he's busy doing Avatar films. So
yeah.
to me, I don't care what he endorses, unless he's directing a Terminator film. I just don't care because
Yeah.
it is his franchise. He dreamed of it. It's all come
Mm,
to it through his imagination, and obviously it's just by the sheer unfortunate of being a young filmmaker when it came up with the idea. He's like Stallone of Rocky. He's never owned the rights to his own creation. Had that have
mm,
been him in his later life, he'd have been signed, sealed, delivered on the contract that it's all in his name. And I
yeah.
think that's what's kind of sad looking at. I know I'm actually talking about Terminator 2 now, I'm talking about Terminator franchise, but it's a big part of this because Terminator 2 pushed the Terminator films into the stature of pop culture, into
Oh
the
yeah,
scale, and
definitely.
kind of if we kickstart with some behind the scenes,
Mm,
um, heading into this is amazing. So James Cameron's obviously we've done Aliens and the Abyss. He's been a busy guy since the first Terminator came out. He, as I said, he never had the rights to these films, but him and Arnie both knew that the person he sold the rights to was going bust the company.
mm,
So they kind of came in and engineered another company to come along, who had just worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger on Total Recall, which I think we mentioned earlier before we went live for this.
yeah.
And it's Carol Co Pictures, who they don't exist anymore, but they'd worked on a lot of those films with them in the 90s, and they had worked with Arnie, so they knew
Yeah.
if we get these guys in, they worked with Arnie, we can get James Cameron on board, we can get Terminator 2 made the way we want it to be made.
Mm,
And that's what's quite interesting is that when all this was in movement, it eventually happened, but there was such a short turnaround where they literally had to tell James Cameron, like, we've spent so much money on this,
yeah.
trying to get it, because this is also Shout out to one of our Twitter followers. I think it's Space Odds 985 off the top of my head. I might have got that wrong, so apologies. Who asked us to bring the story, which was on the schedule, and this is technically an independent film. It was the
Okay.
first ever
Yeah.
film to end up with a budget of $100 million, but it isn't a studio film. It's an independent film made up of varying different production companies investing their money.
Mm.
There are stories of like I don't know what to talk about salaries, but Arnie has like a $15 million salary, and for this to make it easier for them to have the money up front, they bought him a jet which was worth $12 million. But it meant for the company that for the jet they could pay like installments rather than
Yeah.
upfront. So it's one of those where like the behind the scenes this is been chaos, and with James Cameron himself off the back of the Abyss wasn't a flop by any means, but it wasn't a big hit. Obviously, there's
Mm.
and some horrific behind the scenes which we covered in our review for that one. But they kind of came to him and said, "Listen, we're going to make Terminator 2 now, regardless of you being
Mm.
involved or not." They basically said, "You can be involved, you can make it with us, and if you don't want to do it, we will make it anyway."
Yeah.
Which, going off what we
It.
spoke about a minute ago, does that feel like that's probably happened to Terminator 3 and everyone since?
Yeah. I think because Terminator 3 is not a bad film. It's not great, but it's not bad. But then everyone after that has just been getting worse and worse. I think
Yeah.
James Cameron did the right thing on sticking with T2, um, because then you end up with a film as good as Terminator 2, essentially.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of with you in that he did the right thing, and I think also we've got the hindsight of the future. His
Mm.
career post Terminator 2,
Yeah.
he's gross. I mean, we can say it now every week. We pre-record these, of course, and we get to tell you about the Avatar box office. We recorded this on the 24th of Jan. Avatar 2 has now hit $2 billion, and
Mm.
it's just had a whole load of Oscar nominations today. Um, his career's gone pretty well. He's
Yeah.
directed three out of the top six highest grossing films of all time.
Mm.
Probably going to be three out the top four highest grossing films of all time in the next week, which is even more
Yeah.
terrifying as a concept. But that's just how James Cameron does things. And in line with this one, um, the big focus of the story, which is what they didn't think would work, was he had the idea that he wanted the T-800, of course, Arnie, to
Yep.
essentially befriend John Connor. That was a big
Mm.
selling point for him, and that the character arc for Sarah Connor is that she's been not turned into a Terminator, but by psychology and mindset, she has become more of the
A soldier.
machine now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Terminator has become the paternal figure to John Connor. So
Mm.
this is an action film, and we're going to speak about the action, but James Cameron's immediate approach is story, it's character development. And I think that's something that so many action films miss, that
Yeah.
it's so easy for them to get that sort of thing wrong. And I think that's where you notice it starts to work, that he's gone in with story. And people will say he's substance over story. I think that's very unfair because they just
Mm.
pinpoint Avatar and say, oh, look, it's CGI. But he is a very good storyteller, and it is why his films are so successful, that he
Mm.
makes stories that also the general audience get invested in. And a comparison he made when he was writing this was to the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
In
Yeah.
that, he needed to grow a heart, which it's a nice touch. It's a bit too easy. It's a bit on the nose, but
Yeah.
um, I kind of get it. But what are your thoughts on that as a story premise?
Yeah.
Switching. I
Oh.
mean, we'll get to characters later, but Arnie just being a hero by himself.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's such a stark contrast, and it works. I mean, even though it is classed as an action film, I think because I watched it last night, the first sort of like action sequence is when they're breaking Sarah Connor out of the uh, asylum psych ward, and
Yeah,
that's a good like hour into the film, if not a little bit longer. All of the rest of it is sort of, or I mean, you've got the mall scene where with the car chase with the big truck and but that's more of a it's not really action as much as the sort of psych ward because you don't have any guns or anything like that. And that's a good out. So you can tell that he's put a lot of time into the story. But then when the action does kick off, it does really kick off, which is another good point as well. Yeah, but making Arnie the sort of or the T800 a paternal figure to John is a really nice twist, and he does like Sarah Connor has that little speech when they're loading up all the guns. It's a inner monologue where she's saying that throughout all of her boyfriends and all of her ex partners, the one that is the most paternal to John is weirdly enough a machine, because he is programmed to be that way. He's not gonna like. I think she said they're not gonna get drunk and beat him. They're not gonna abuse him or anything like that. His whole job is to protect John, and he will do that until he dies.
It's such a great way to do it, and I think people will forget this, that we're so accustomed to T2 and the history since, but imagine it today. And I'm not going to make comparisons to like big films now, but you've had this incredible action film from a couple of years ago that's getting a sequel, and it's kickstarted the careers of one of the biggest A-listers in the world at the moment. As it was in 1990 still. So look at the films that Arnie did across those late 80s, heading into T2,
Yeah, that was prime Arnie
and
years.
yeah, and you're gonna make him a protector of a kid
Mm.
who's keeps getting told don't kill people when you're the Terminator, like the Terminator, not a Terminator, the Terminator, and it's actually such a ballsy thing for them to have ever done. And I think if this had been a studio film, they would never have allowed that to happen, which is something I fundamentally think that they would
Mm.
never have let it happen. And even to some of the other story ideas that at the beginning, James Cameron wanted Arnie to play two versions of the T800, a good version, a bad version. So they'd still have the Skynet sending one back, the Resistance sending the other, and they realized very, very early days this isn't going to work. Then they floated with the idea. Now, on the first Terminator, what's amazing is that James Cameron came up with the T1000, not by name, but he came up with a liquid metal Terminator for Terminator 1, and it was
Okay.
impossible to do at the time, so
Mm.
that's why he created the T800. So he was then going to have an evil T800 in this, kill it off halfway through, then put the T1000 in, as I guess the big boss at the end.
Yeah.
And then obviously he switches away from that and puts the T1000 as the main villain, and the rest
Mm.
is history, which is once again them doing some genius stuff. And I think kind of in turn with that, what's kind of not works in his favor, but James Cameron's approach is, we've got Arnie, he's a unit, it's a metal exoskeleton. The
Ender strength.
T1000 can't be. Yeah, like
Mm.
it can't be another Arnie. It can't be another like bulky guy. So you bring in Robert Patrick, who I think is in Die Hard 2 at this point in time. I've not seen him in a lot
Mm.
else from late 80s, early 90s, but he knew for what this Terminator required, what this was going to be, a liquid
Mm.
metal Terminator, you have to have something completely different. And credit to, we'll get into some of the special effects shortly, but the logic of the T1000 as a villain, I think, is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything like it where a sequel has gone in such like a bold, different, difficult
Mm.
direction. And I guess even when you think of the opening, I don't know fully how the marketing went for this, but when you think of the T1000, it's a newer Terminator, it's playing a cop. You'd assume
Mm.
that would be the good guy, that would help John, and that the evil good
Yeah.
guy is going to come back. So the fact it never was that is a twist in its own right. But I'm just curious, what are your initial thoughts on the T1000?
Well, that's the thing. I think when I started watching it last night, I was thinking about that. I was like, yeah, if you went into this cold, you would think that the sort of the T what we know as the cop would be the one that's sort of helping John, because you've got that connection with Terminator 1 where Arnie was the bad guy trying to kill John. And for the first like 20 minutes of the film, it does seem like this T1000 is trying to find John to make sure he's safe. Because you get that first scene with Arnie where he's just destroying that whole bar just to get some clothes, basically. Um, but yeah, the T1000 as a sort of villain, he doesn't have a lot of lines, which is one thing that I noticed. But he's so menacing anyway, because like that scene where he's chasing after John, when they get out of the mall, he's running like a psycho. Like it's so
Yeah.
robot like. It's so robot like, but you can sort of see that fluidity in it as well. And he's just got a straight face throughout the whole film. He doesn't smile, he doesn't frown, like he's just emotionless, and you can tell that that was a good choice because he's so menacing.
Yeah, and I think what's a big thing of this is that I feel like Robert Patrick kind of goes not uncredited, but because you think of Arnie, you just don't. You think of
Mm,
Robert Patrick because he's like he's the metal one, and he's so much more than as you said. His actual like physical performance is quite incredible, and some of the stuff we were sort of finding out behind the scenes for this, um, he practiced how to breathe using only his nose to keep his mouth shut, so that when he's doing his running scenes, it
mm,
never looked like he broke fatigue.
mm,
And his entire movement, like Arnie in the first film, the performance is in the eyes. That
yeah,
he would train his face to be still, and his eyes would track what needs to be tracked. And I think because of his sort of his facial structure as well,
yeah,
it's very Hulk-like. Which now I think of Peacemaker when he played the bloody dad. I don't think it's an inside joke,
mm,
but there's obviously something there with Robert Patrick that they nailed everything that they needed to do with him. But the complete difference, that we knew the T-800 was slow in that first film. So
yeah,
to make a quick one, it makes so much more sense logistically. And I think because me and you obviously like weren't born when this came out,
mm,
we don't have that memory of how was this at the time, how was this at the cinemas. We know it was a massive hit. We know it's been so highly regarded over the decades, and it should be highly regarded. But I would have loved to have seen a film like this
mm,
because I'm when I mentioned earlier, I'd imagine an action film done today. Like I can't even think of one. Like the last big action film that was original was probably John Wick. That's not any IP. That's nothing.
yeah,
And and then like obviously that couldn't work as a sequel where if you had the opposite to John Wick, it just wouldn't work. So
mm,
I'd love someone to comment if they're watching anything similar in that respect, where a film's like not 180 the villain, but you've took an incredible idea for a villain and you've sort of improved it by a dozen without
mm,
changing too much, but changing everything you'd never expect to change because it's almost unparalleled. I don't want to say, oh, it's like Avatar. The villain comes back and now he's an Avatar. That's quite obvious. Like that's to have an evil
yeah.
Avatar villain makes sense. That's just someone becoming something they never
The
wanted
hate,
to be. But
yeah,
the T-1000 is just unbelievable. And yeah, as I said,
mm,
Robert Patrick's performance is one that isn't spoken about enough. And like Arnie in the first one, he was obviously
mm,
weapons trained not to blink when you're firing guns. And I feel things when you read that, you don't notice it on a first viewing, you don't notice it on
mm,
multiple viewings, but it when you get told facts like that, you pick it up
mm,
on repeat viewings.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
I think for this, we see so many action films these days as well. You're never gonna focus on the eye, say, "Oh, look, he's not blinked, has he?" Unless it was
yeah,
a mega close up of the eyes, which isn't gonna happen.
mm,
Um, but sticking with the T-1000, I'm gonna not put you on the spot because I don't think you've seen this. But I'm just gonna ask: did you, by any chance, get a chance to see a documentary done last year on Disney Plus called Industrial Light and Magic?
no, I didn't.
Yeah, that's fine. Everyone watching at home and you, Eamon, I'm going to recommend this show. It is ILM is basically like not just George Lucas's baby. Industrial Light and Magic are a VFX company that George Lucas founded before he made the first Star Wars film.
Okay,
And people can say pioneers about a lot of things, but ILM
mm,
and Weta are probably to me the two pillars of CGI in the modern era of filmmaking. And ILM is responsible for moving the industry forward decades
mm,
and decades at a time. And I'd recommend the documentary to anyone who wants to learn more about George Lucas, so more about the history of film. And that's what I'm going to kind of plug here. One of the 6 episodes, I'd say a third of it is on Terminator 2. And it kind of kickstarts with The Abyss, which is the last James Cameron film. That
yeah,
there's a weird water reflection. That was like the first ever piece of motion capture done. And kind of like George Lucas watching Jurassic Park, who watched that and thought, now I can make my Star Wars prequel films, also ILM. Um, James Cameron, after The Abyss, knew I can do my metallic Terminator,
Yeah,
I can do my liquid Terminator, and obviously it wasn't ready at the time. Still,
yeah,
this is a massive part in that. If you think of this film, if the liquid Terminator doesn't work, the film doesn't work.
yeah,
You'd have just something that's an incoherent mess. And the original goal was for it to be claymation in the mid 80s, and he said no at the
oh,
time because that would never work.
yeah, yeah,
And I think with it being liquid silver, that adds something else to needing that technology to be ready. But
yeah,
um, the Industrial Light and Magic series does an incredible job at going into the process. You know, Robert Patrick walking around the streets with felt tip lines grids across his face because when they're
mm,
scanning it into computers in the 90s, you know, it's not motion capture dots, it's they have to do everything. And his
yeah,
performance in dealing with an uncreated technology is as important as his physical performance when he's in the police uniform. So I recommend
yeah,
everyone to have a look at that because I'm not just going to say what is in that documentary, but what Industrial Light and Magic and James Cameron himself, they spent, I believe, $15 million of this $100 million budget on that CGI.
mm,
The technology that didn't exist at the time that they were creating, they were working on, and I believe it's 3.5 to 5 minutes of screen time total output. But even watching it again at home, you know, I watched it on, I think it was Sunday when we spoke when I was watching it.
yeah,
It still looks amazing, the
yeah,
visuals. Like going through the jail bars, and it happens a lot for me with these sort of big films where these pioneering films tend to look the best. And
mm,
it's not because they're doing it for the first time. It's that I think creatively every single person involved is is invested in the idea and the possibility of what it is. They've not
yeah,
done it so many times. They're not. I'm not saying no one ever gives it 100%, but without insulting James Cameron's work by comparing it to Marvel, you look at like a half-assed job, which isn't the VFX staff's fault. That's the industry and
yeah,
Marvel's fault at unrealistic deadlines. But you look at the pressure they're under to do this, and they
mm,
go and create this tech that has evolved into motion capture, which we know now that James Cameron is still pioneering in 2022 with underwater
mm,
filming. Like it's amazing how many of these big moments can be backtracked to James Cameron's work. But just your thoughts on that, like again, like looking at it from a more modern lens, like
yeah.
how are those sequences for you? Like, because to me, it's not aged at all. Like it fits for the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the scene that stands out, or the two scenes that stand out, is towards the end where they're in that sort of machine factory, and the T-1000 gets frozen and then gets thawed out, basically, and he's reverts back to his sort of metal self. Essentially, you've got all the silver on him. That scene stands out, and the final scene when he dies, and he's in that
Yeah.
the lava, and he's like going through all the forms that he's taken throughout the film, and he's like flicking through each one essentially, and he's melting. That I mean, if you told me that was a shot from like the mid 2000s or anything like that, I'd believe that that was a good like. I'd believe you that was shot then. But the fact that it was in 1991, which was before we were born, basically, um, it's just yeah, it really stands out as really well done. So the fact that they spent that much money on it makes sense, and I'm glad they did spend that money on that rather than some like sort of like because I think with a lot of action films nowadays, it's always like action set piece, a little bit of story, action set piece,
Yeah.
whereas you some of it looks a little bit not. Some of it looks great, but some of it doesn't look great. So that I'd rather they spend the money like James Cameron did on making those CGI pieces look really good.
Yeah, and I think with Avatar 2, we're not covering it in this series because we've done it just before we started the series, and obviously, me and you were on that
Mm,
spoiler reef part 2. But the fact he's doing it still now, like it's 2022, people joke about no Avatar 2. He spent 13 years working on a
mm,
film, for better or worse. 8 years developing tech, 2 years, whatever you want to say about it. His dedication to what he believes in the technology he's using, I think, is second to none. And the filmmakers I put on these pedestals, it's not everyone. It's your George Lucas's, it's your James Camerons. Steven Spielberg's to me the greatest director that's ever lived and ever directed, and his films, you give him the camera, he'll make you a beautiful film. He'll be
mm,
pioneering tech, and he can shoot off camera. He's gonna not develop stuff himself. That's very disrespectful to him. But he's worked on the films that have pioneered the industry, and ILM following this would obviously then go and do Jurassic Park straight after,
mm,
which and then Jar Jar Binks motion capture. Jar Jar Binks was the first fully animated actor in a motion capture role, and this all stems off James Cameron. It stems off this film. It stems off The
mm,
Abyss. It's been this slow, steady sequence of events. Gollum in Lord of the Rings, which is motion
mm.
capture. Then James Cameron then goes to them to use for Avatar, and Avatar redefines all form of
Yeah.
computer generated imagery. It's just it's remarkable, and this is such a massive moment for the industry. And I know you've not seen the film Babylon, and I'm not going to recommend you to watch it, but this is a very weird tangent because I saw it on Friday. The film ends in a really weird montage. Not really a spoiler, but I don't really care. A character sits down at the cinema in the decade that the film is set in, and then it goes through a history of cinema up to it goes up to Avatar.
Yeah.
And some people find it insulting that it's like, oh, you've just chucked in every film that's not renovated the industry, but every groundbreaking film is chucked in there. And obviously, when this montage was happening, it took me a couple of obvious films to realize, okay, this is where they're going. Terminator 2's in there. And this is a very, very quick montage. Like, it's not like, let's look at a film for 3 seconds.
Mm.
It's like a shot from every film. And you notice Terminator 2. And obviously, it ends of Avatar. And I guess it's that pioneering scope that I'm coming at this angle again from now seeing Terminator 2 being
Yeah.
referenced in a film in 2023, even though it's set during the 20s, which is why
Mm.
fundamentally the scene doesn't work. It's one of those that its place in cinema is earned. Its place in the history
Mm.
books is earned, and it's quite amazing in that right. And I think going back to what we spoke about earlier is that the reason for that is the T1000, not just the T800. That we
Yeah.
love Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's amazing in this film. Um, he gets developed as far as a robot could be developed,
Yeah.
but the decision to run of the T1000s to do the difficult decisions they did to make that tech work, I think changes the film. Because if it was that original idea, if it was another T800, I honestly think it'd be terrible. I mean, would you be entertained by Arnold Schwarzenegger chasing Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because at that point they're the same machine, so it would just sort of cancel each other out. Because you can't have two T800s because they're the same strength. So how does that? It isn't. It's not. There's no sort of like. There's no one that's better. Whereas with the T1000, it is evident that the T1000 is a better machine. I mean, he kills the T800, or
Yeah.
yeah, he shuts down the T800 at one point. Pretty much. So it shows you that. I mean, that wouldn't happen with a T800 versus T800. Just wouldn't work.
It, it'd just be like, I mean, I'm not saying the piss out of Aliens because I love it, but the board pitch for Aliens is he goes in a room, he has the title Alien, and he adds an S with a dollar sign. It'd be like doing
Mm.
it to the Terminator. It'd be Terminators. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And not to joke about a new horror film, but Megan's getting a sequel, and loads of people, myself included, but it should be called Megan's.
Mm.
And now they've officially called it Megan 2.0, which is a shame, but it's understandable. And this is kind of it. Like you've got to gamble, and James Cameron does, which is why his films are successful. He never goes for the easy option, whether it's
Mm.
destroying a half-built replica of a Titanic, whether it's locking himself away for 10 years to develop the technology to go and make Avatar 1.
Mm.
His identity to the craft is insane, and
Yeah.
like the last few films, at this point in time in the early 90s, he is an absolute monster on set. There's no hiding. Crew wearing t-shirts saying like they survived Terminator 2, or like they wouldn't come back for Terminator 3 because James Cameron is such a perfectionist. And
Mm.
obviously, like, mental and physical abuse in a set is obviously never right, especially when he almost killed
Yeah.
some of the cast members from his last film. But when it is in a more, how would you call it, not fair way, when it's actually him working and it's just like
Yeah.
this is a pushy perfectionist rather than a murderer, then it's understandable that, okay, he's pushed them,
Mm.
but this is his output. And if you did work on the Terminator 2 crew and you had a terrible time working on the Terminator 2, go and watch that at the cinema. You think, yeah, this guy's a bellend. But
Yeah.
look at what the outcome is. And then you'd be telling the whole world, I worked on Terminator 2. You wouldn't
Yeah.
hide from that. You'd be telling
No.
everyone for the rest of your life, I worked on Terminator 2. And that's kind of how I stem with James Cameron, that yes, he's a madman. Yes, he's psychotic and goes past the limit. But when he's not going past that limit and putting you at the limit, I think that's sometimes, for me at least, in my own belief and how I've worked, that can be the best way to work.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows his devotion to the craft. Because he's one of those that values quality over quantity. So even though he hasn't done a lot of films, like as you said earlier, 3 out of the top four will be his films essentially. So it just shows you how, yeah, he might be psychotic and sort of pushing people to their breaking points, but the output at the end is something that's just insanely good.
Yeah. And that's it. And I think even in this, I mean, we'll talk some of the other characters. We spoke about some of the metal guys, but let's talk the Connors.
Mm.
Let's talk Sarah Connor. So, we've obviously got Linda Hamilton returning, and I guess this we're going to get onto probably something where I'm going to get pissed off and stuff like this. Strong female characters. I love Sarah Connor. I think everyone
Oh
does.
yeah, yeah,
And the one big thing is that in between Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, there's obviously a physical change within her. There is
oh
a
yeah.
mental change within her. She's been told about
Judgment
the
Day.
not just Judgment Day, like mankind is basically going to end.
Mm.
Um, this is going to happen. You just survive this. It's your son that's going to save us.
Yeah,
You're like what? She's meant to be a teenager at this point. And then obviously,
yeah,
this is set in 95, not 91. Obviously, it was released in 91, but those 14 years, I love that we don't even need to see what she's been up to, that we just understand her from first meeting her at the hospital. We
yeah,
understand why she is the way she is. And what kind of annoys me is that's going to, without segueing on too hard, is people just go and look at Sarah Connor example of a strong female character. And I'm there like, she's strong, but she's not strong because she's pumping iron.
yeah,
She's strong because she's mentally fought Terminator 1 and she's like dedicated the years of her life that
mm.
follow to becoming this almost super soldier. And my
Yeah,
follow up, without vexing, because I kind of want to, is if this was released today and there was a gap between films and she came back strong, the same people that worship her would then turn around and
yeah,
be like, oh, it's woke because she's a strong female character.
mm.
And like there's no such thing. Like they are. Like that's how
Mm.
this character is. That's how James Cameron made Ripley in Aliens,
Yeah,
following on from her in the first Alien film. He's a director that he's fundamentally excellent at creating and evolving these types of characters. And I think Linda Hamilton's performance in this is great, and even the behind the scenes is that she worked with James Cameron to push a lot of her ideas. That she wanted her to be insane, basically. James
yeah,
Cameron was fine for the physique and to be strong, but it's Linda Hamilton that pushed. She has essentially lost her mind because she knows what's going to happen to the future. And I kind of would like, what is all your thoughts on like coming back after the first Terminator film? How is that seeing her how she's become?
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's such a jump because you don't necessarily get shown what she's been up to and what's been happening, but you get little snippets, you get little hints, like when she's at the psych ward and she's getting evaluated, and the head doctor is saying like, you went through all this stuff, and then like when John talks about his mom and how or like she met that ex Green Beret guy and taught her how to be a soldier, stuff like that. You get little bits, and it makes sense. But yeah, Linda Hamilton, like the performance of the character is just really because she is very cold. Um, like when John saves her from the mental asylum, she is very cold, and she's like, "Why did you do that? You put yourself in danger." Whereas at that point, it's a really good thing going back to the T-800 picking up on emotions and becoming human. He's like, "Why is there water coming from your eyes?" And it's because John is like upset that he's went through all this trouble to save his mom, and his mom is basically saying, "You shouldn't have done that," when he just wanted a mom. Um, so it's all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, Linda Hamilton as a character, I mean, you can tell she's been putting in the work as well. Like she's not jacked like a lot of other like women would be, but she is strong, physically and mentally. I mean, to go through all of those, I think what the gap's about 15 years. She's been in that mental asylum for what, at least 5 of those years. I mean, I'd hate to be in a mental asylum for 2 years. Being still kept to yourself and still having your own ideas, but knowing how to play the system for 5 years is just, as a character, that's really well done.
Yeah, and kind of in line with that, with following on to talking about John as well, that I always been quite critical in the past of Edward Furlong as an actor, and I kind of was so I was curious to go back. Is that I remember the first time I watched this film, I hated him, and I've always
Mm,
had this thing about like young actors, and if anyone's, I hate the Razzies. I don't follow them as an award cycle, and it's like this week's really fucked. They nominated 12-year-old girl and tried to call her the worst actor of the year. They're not even worth me bringing up if I'm being honest, as far as scum goes, and yeah, you get some actors that you enjoy, some you don't. And Edward Furlong is one I've sort of criticised in the past. And watching it again on Sunday, like I actually just didn't mind him. They're like, yes, he hadn't been to like drama school or anything like that. Like he was very much scouted and got his role in
mm.
the film. But actually, he's got great chemistry with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And
It does,
I
yeah.
guess fundamentally, me like take my like arrogance and what I enjoy out of a film. He functions as he's in like John Connor as a character is innocent. He's a child
Mm,
that they tried to murder his mom so he couldn't be born, and
yeah,
now they're trying to murder him as a
murder him.
teenager who doesn't have a clue. And actually, I guess the older we get and the more we learn about life and whatnot, we realize how many like not fucked up kids there are. But his scenario of never knowing who his dad was, his mom being in a mental
Mm,
asylum, having foster parents who be cleared, and like it's quite common to have like rebellious teenagers in that respect.
mm,
And actually, I think I owe probably them an apology for how I spoke about in the past because I thought it was pretty great on this viewing.
yeah.
Not that he'd care that I'd apologise because it's not this happened not in football this week. All the Arsenal fans are doing about Eddie and Ketia, but I was on the right side of that conversation without getting contextualist to clearly when we're recording it. But yeah, it all works with Arnie, and obviously when you get to the ending, now I know why you cry with Arnie. The thumbs up into the lava pit. I didn't get
Well, yeah,
emotional, but I was
yeah,
like, I know why people cry now. Like I too, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like the Grinch grew his heart. I get
yeah.
it, and it's nice to have a 180 on films that no matter how old you are, no matter how many times you see a film, your opinions
Mm,
can change and they're allowed to change. And there are certain YouTubers, there are certain personas. This isn't just film. This is football,
mm,
everything. Where politics, where some people's arrogance is such an extortionate high that even when they know they're wrong, they just don't have it in them to admit it. So that's kind of
yeah.
me making my peace with teenage John Connor. Um, but yeah, sorry, Eamon. Like, what are your thoughts on him? Like, not Edward
Yeah,
Furlong,
I
but like
think
John Connor or having him in the film.
yeah, well, I think in the film they mentioned that he's like 10 years old. Um, so I'm not sure if I misread, like misinterpreted that.
He's meant to be 14 or 13, if
Right,
depending on when he was
that
born.
makes because I was like when I was watching it as a kid, I was like, yeah, this is like a 16, 17-year-old. This isn't a kid. Um, but the fact that he is that young, it does show because he is mentally naive. Not mentally naive, but he is just naive as most kids are, most teenagers are. Um, but yeah, it does show that he does have good chemistry with Arnie. I mean, Arnie was top height of his popularity at that age as well. So anyone like if yeah if he didn't if he just got scouted and somebody told me, oh yeah, you're going to be in a film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, even now I'd be bouncing off the walls because it's Arnie. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, his the character as well. He does help the yeah. It's like you said, the Grinch grows a heart. The T800, he helps the T800 grow and develop more into a human. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting. Like I just like his character. I mean, I didn't mind him before, but yeah, no, rewatching yesterday and finding out he is that young is just really surprising.
Yeah. Also, I never apologize. No, you are correct. He is meant to be 10 years old in this. I
Yeah.
got the dates mixed up. Yeah. So he was born in canon,
Mm.
in May. No, sorry. He was. I believe it popped up on the police radar,
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
when they're going through, and he was born on February the 28th, 1985.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
So him being 10 years old with his skill set and stuff like that, even like the little bits that he knows how to hack a bank card, that shows the level of like sort of not training but effect his mom had on him because he knows all this sort of like hacking stuff and stuff like that. Riding a ped around and stuff like that, just generally.
yeah, and it's what kids do. They're 10. They're harmless, and that's the whole purpose of it. And
Mm.
I'd say he's more mature than most sort of 10-year-old actors you see. I always think of like Harry Potter, which is the obvious one. With the
Yeah.
generation that grew up with that. And I guess they probably set the bar for what people expect of young actors in lead
Mm.
roles these days. But no, it is fascinating, kind of with him in that, and that's the whole thing. Like we spoke about Arnold, spoke about the T1000. Let's talk about the score for this. Brad Fiedel, I'm gonna get it right, not Brad Friedel, the old Blackburn goalkeeper. Brad Fiedel returned to this, and I'm not here to criticize it. What I do love, the theme in Terminator 2 is significantly better than Terminator 1. And I do
Yeah.
like the fact that James Cameron has gone back and got the same composer. And the actual main beat is a genuine fact that it is him banging pots in a recording studio, actual pans, not, a drum,
Yeah.
actual cooking saucepans, which is amazing because it's such a good theme. Like when we play the outro today for
Yeah.
when I was doing the editing, this was the one I was looking forward to the most because you get the proper Terminator 2 theme and it gets you
Yeah.
in the mood and the zone. And I love the theme. The score itself, I'm not eager on. I've never gone
Mm.
back and listened to it properly, but it is fine. It's serviceable. But
Yeah.
I think for certainly how I felt with a lot of the James Cameron films, when we did Spielberg, we were blessed because we were talking about John Williams every week for almost a year. But,
Mm.
you know, for this score at least, I don't feel too much to it outside of a great theme, and the action on screen does the talking, and the music
Yeah.
accompanies the incredible set pieces. Of course, I'm listening, but I'm paying much more attention to what I'm seeing in respect to what I'd rather be listening to. But what are your thoughts on that score as well?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know me, I don't really pay attention to scores as much, but with the T2 score, I mean the actual beat, I mean you played it on the intro. That is synonymous with T2. I mean, if you play that beat to me anywhere, I will think my headspace will go to T2 because it is just so iconic for that film. It's just yeah, it's basically synonymous. And it's not out there. It's not something that I listen to. I mean, I don't listen to many film scores anyway, but it is one that stands out um, a lot.
No, I'm with you on that, and it is interesting as well when we get to his next few films, the composers that do come in with James Cameron's work, and kind of following on that. Let's talk some iconography. We spoke about this film, the impact that
Mm.
it would have been lovely to have someone older than us on, who might have remembered seeing this at cinema or whatnot, but schedules are what schedules are. So you do have two younger people watching this, unfortunately, viewers who
Yeah,
really wanted maybe someone a bit older, which we too would have probably loved talking to, because I'd love to. I say this about a lot of old films. I'd have loved to have known what it was like back in the day. And I think one of the,
yeah.
not to plug the Spielberg stuff from last year, but when we brought Ed on from the IndieCasts, who spoke about watching Raiders of the Lost Ark back in back in 81, sorry, I was just sort of flabbergasted. Not only did Ed look incredibly well for his age, but just knowing that, like, you see photos of the old Star Wars in the 70s of people queuing in
Yeah,
the streets, and it's like our generation will never have that. And I
yeah,
think when the decades that follow us come, not to shit on Marvel, it's mainly going to be Marvel films, right? And it's going to be kids
yeah,
saying, "What was Endgame like?" To
yeah.
which, there's probably going to be been like 100 Marvel films by the time the next generation comes in. So there'll be certain films,
Mm.
of our lives that we'll look back at that, that was electric at the cinema. That was insane. And I think me and you and Sim are the same one. One of my favorite cinema experiences of all time, strangely enough, was 22 Jump Street. But
Oh,
that's
okay.
but that's because you don't really get comedies that sell out
Yeah.
that are actually start to end laugh out loud funny.
Mm.
But kids aren't going to ask me how was 22 Jump Street in
No.
20 years' time. And it is curious as to maybe someone could comment what films do you think people would be asking about in 20 years' time that we all remember seeing at the cinema?
Yeah.
Because that's actually a good question. It's a
I
very
think. I think.
generational
Yeah.
question.
I think first, Infinity War and Endgame will definitely be in there. Possibly Iron
Yeah,
Man. Um.
Force Awakens probably because it was the first
Yeah.
Star Wars film as well.
But then,
Um,
yeah, you've got the negative connotations of episode
yeah,
8 and 9. So, yeah, Force Awakens, though. I mean, yeah, Force
just
Awakens,
in terms of
Infinity
like
War,
hype,
Endgame. Yeah,
yeah,
the Infinity War, Endgame, and Iron Man, because that's the one that sort of kicked off the
Kickstarter.
MCU.
Yeah, it's a great question. People at home, if you're watching, comment some of those films, or maybe if you are older, no insult intended. Comment the ones you'd have. I get it happens like with football where people always, but if you could have been at one football game from before your time, what would it be? You get all
Yeah,
that sort of stuff, and I'd love to hear it from film fans. Like maybe there's a film they got to at the cinema which they didn't think would be a big deal, and it became one of the biggest deals, or vice versa. So do comment and get along. But
Phantom
talking about
Menace
this
as well.
film,
Just thinking about that.
that's
Phantom
the
Menace.
one. That would be the one.
Yeah,
Like if I when Star Wars fans always say Phantom Menace or Episode 4, but
yeah,
for me, like every person I've spoke to that's older that remembers everything about the Phantom Menace coming out, um, is sensational. I mean, I was two and a half, well, 2 and 3 quarters when that film came out, and it was the first Star Wars film I saw. But I can't sit there and tell you that I went to the cinema a year before to go and watch the trailer. I
yeah,
can tell you that when the Force Awakens trailer dropped, I made my sister pull over on the motorway in a safe space for me to watch a trailer. And that's modern tech versus the old days, and
yeah,
you know it is fascinating that, and kind of with Terminator 2, its box office itself. We mentioned this was the first of $100 million film. This would go on to be the third highest grossing film in history at the time of release. It grossed $520 million. Now in 1991, in my head, I'm trying to think what is the highest grossing film of all time. I could be wrong, but I believe it's E.T. So it's a Spielberg one. I could be
yeah,
wrong. Obviously, Jurassic Park would smash it again in '93 and take the crown from itself. But if I'm missing something, someone please comment. I think it's E.T. at this point in time, the highest grossing film in history, but I could be wrong. But this was the highest grossing R-rated film, I believe, until either The Matrix or Deadpool. I don't know which one. But this stuck around at the top of these charts, and R-rated films. It's a fashionable statement now. Back then, it was
mm,
probably a bit more common. You have them. You just wouldn't have
yeah,
these insanely high blockbuster R-rated films, and I just think it's remarkable that this was the third highest grossing film of all time. And we're talking with James Cameron again now that he's got, probably by the time this comes out, three of the top four.
mm,
Um, People would joke on Twitter for like the last year, like, you just don't bet against James Cameron. And I guess if you've got that knowledge of seeing his films in the '90s as well, you look at his
yeah,
career. It began with Piranha 2, a box office bombs. He got sacked off it, etc., etc. His rise is insane, and you just can't bet
mm,
against him.
yeah,
And for this, like, it outgrossed the first Terminator film inside 4 days. And that is an insane achievement in its own right. So it's amazing numbers, and this is the biggest surprise. I didn't even realize that this did really well at the Oscars. Um, Not as a disrespectful way. Like,
no,
you just
yeah,
don't really look at sequels as Oscar films. I mean, ironically, say that on the day that two sequels have been put in Best Film.
mm,
One of them is a James Cameron sequel, of course it is. But this was nominated for Best Makeup, Best Sound Effects Editing, Best Visual Effects, Best Cinematography and Editing. So 6 nominations, and it won 4 of those, which is remarkable. And it is, I
mm,
believe, the only Terminator film to be nominated to win an Oscar, and also obviously the only Terminator film to actually win an Oscar as
win,
well.
yeah,
So, and it won 4. So fair play to James Cameron. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know you don't follow sort of Oscars as much as I
yeah,
do and whatnot, but would you like? Obviously, because we've grown up knowing Terminator 2 is this big action film,
mm,
that's why I'd never considered Oscars, because you
yeah.
just wouldn't think it's associated with it.
Well, yeah, that's the thing because I think with my outside knowledge, like sort of outside view of the Oscars are very not snobby, but very sort of like sort of proper. as you would
Yeah.
think. They're not gonna have big action films um, be nominated for Oscars, even though like Top Gun Maverick has been
Mhm.
nominated this year. But I think back then, I think going just back to the R ratedness of it, I think back then R rated films were quite common. I think because the studios weren't focusing as much on getting as many eyes on it as possible. I think nowadays films are limited by the studios because they want more people to watch it. And if you make a 18 or an R-rated film now, not a lot of people are going to watch it because they're just not. So I think that getting Oscar nominations, so it tracks basically, considering the age that it came out. But for it to win them, I think the ones that it won is really like it makes sense as well, like makeup and visuals and stuff. I mean, the makeup, going back to the final scenes or the final sort of when the T800 is fighting the T1000, and you see the T1000 like scraping Arnie's face off, and it exposing like the metalwork underneath. That's really well done, um, especially from a makeup point of view.
Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? That you've had that not prestige as such, but this fundamentally I think looks better than 84. Like not because it's more modern, but as you said, like they're able to integrate technologies moved on. They can
Mm,
have the chipped away face easier than they could have in the years that before, and it is just amazing the makeup heading into that. And I think so. They just got something else that works. Like there's something off about Terminator One. It's a really weird thing, but on the scene where Arnie is not clay, but it's like the animatronic mask thing.
mm,
And obviously, it's not that it looks fake, but his hair's different, and he's got a
yeah,
different haircut in this film. And I think his hair just looks better in Terminator. Very weird thing for me to talk about. But there's just something about his costume design has switched drastically, and
mm,
it's not that he looks cooler. It's not that he's in like black leather clothes and has a shotgun on a bike and stuff. They've just aesthetically changed the most minute things,
yeah,
and it's worked in Arnie's favor. Whether it's because he's also come on more as an actor, I don't know.
mm.
But
Well, it's a
it
lot
is
of
certainly
minute changes that add up to make a
much
visually
better.
impactful. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And kind of following through with a lot of this, as we always talk about, how do we buy it today? At the time of recording, Terminator Judgment Day is the only James Cameron film you can buy on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. However, it is one of the worst rated 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray discs, with even James Cameron himself not being impressed by the transfer, which is very strange to read. Which probably explains why none of the other ones have followed because he just won't sign off on any of them. This was re-released in 3D, I think in 2017 or 16 maybe for an anniversary. But either way, it had a re-release, and
mm,
it didn't gross much at the box office because let's be honest, you can get away with Titanic 3D, but ultimately it's Titanic. People are going to go. It was
yeah,
released on Valentine's Day. It was 2012. It was very good. It was still the early days of 3D. No one cares about Terminator 2 in 3D. Let's just be honest. No one cares about
mm,
Terminator 3D. So, what a waste of a 4K disc just to get a cheap, quick 3D cutout. Um, and hopefully the time comes where they can get it remastered properly.
yeah,
Because at least unlike The Abyss, you can even pick it up on Blu-ray, which is how I watched it. And you know, I've had that for many years in the shelf. It's a really cool, like not interactive edition, but gone are the days of like good home media where you'd have to like play games. That apparently on the DVD version of this film, if you press the right arrow 5 times on the main menu, it doesn't follow a Skynet setting and it plays the special edition of the film, and it's the only way you can watch the special edition of the film because you've like bugged Skynet. And I love that DVDs used to have that, but
yeah,
very off the point. But again, it's nice to see a bit of effort. So, how can you buy Terminator 2? As I said, you can get it in all media. Not that we're here to advertise them, but it's nice that I can talk about one that's got a modern release to a point. And kind of following
mm,
that, how is this film perceived today? Me and you spoke magnificently about it. You know, we're the generation that didn't even get to see it on the big screen.
yeah,
It's pretty safe to say that, you know, when people do that question, what is the greatest sequel of all time?
mm,
Terminator 2's always in the top 5 that turn up.
Yeah,
You've got what, Terminator 2, The Dark Knight. I'll chuck Top Gun Maverick in there now. That's going to be there for
yeah,
long term. Um, Aliens, another James Cameron
yeah,
film.
yeah.
But Terminator 2 and The Dark Knight, I feel, are the two that sat at the top of that list for a long time for a lot of
Mm,
people. Um, which, you know, it's not just the fact that the sequel is better than the original, it's that the original is so good in its own right. The
yeah,
sequel just takes it into a new direction, takes it to another level, and this delivers with that. And I love the fact
yeah,
that not that Terminator 2 is high regarded, that no matter how bad the other ones have been since, I know there are fans of it, don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
they haven't detrimentally ruined the experience of
The
Terminator 1 and 2.
legacy. Yeah, yeah. I think with Terminator 2, I mean, it's the impact it's had is so monumental. It's ingrained in pop culture now. Like the saying "Hasta la vista, baby," I'll be
Yeah.
back. I mean, that final scene where the Terminator is dying, um, being lowered into the lava pit, and he sticks his thumb up at the end. It's in the remake of Doom, not Doom Eternal, the one before that, the remake. If you jump in lava and you die, um, the Doom guy actually puts his thumb up as basically like Arnie did in Terminator 2. So it's just little bits like that. They're so ingrained in like pop culture now. It's had such a massive impact just on pop culture in general.
Yeah, and kind of, I don't want to talk about meme culture because that sort of really brings it down a
Mm,
peg, but a recent meme is Dyson from this.
yes.
When he's dying and has his final breaths, that's become a meme in the last year. I'm not going to go into the context of most of those memes are, but when I was watching it, unfortunately, it became the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing thing of when
Mm,
you're getting to the moment where he does his last few breaths. But I just wanted to give a quick shout out to that because it's an amazing moment and kind of heading to final scenes, not final scenes, favorite scenes of the film. I mean, I love most of this, but it's hard to pick a favorite
is
because it is so well done. If someone has a gun to hand, pick your favorite scene from Terminator 2. I'm gonna go really sad and nerdy and go with the T1000 going through the gate slash them breaking out of
mm,
the
Psych Ward.
hospital because
Yeah,
the image of Arnie with the box of the roses, the slow mo, the shotgun,
well, that
the
was before.
fear.
That's
Yeah,
even
this is
more.
what I mean. Sorry, it's all
Yeah,
it's all. Sorry, no, it is correct, and it's because I can't pick a good scene. There's just
yeah,
so many amazing scenes throughout this. Um, but yeah, I want to just the T1000 going through the bars for me, like where I sit with like CGI, following that technology, motion capture, the stuff I've been
mm,
interested in for like 10 plus years, following it behind the scenes of the industry. Um, that to me is like not it's not the best scene, it's not the favorite scene, but that's
yeah,
something I'll pinpoint as like the scene that changed cinema is that, and
yeah.
it is one in many amazing ones. But sorry, if I was going to put you on the spot, what's your favorite scene?
Oh, that's. I think I can pick out three. I wouldn't be able to narrow it down to one, but number one is sort of when Arnie's walking out of the bar at the beginning, and
Yeah.
the bar owner is like, "I can't let you take his bike," and then he like just rips the shotgun out of his hands, and then turns back and takes his sunglasses, sits on the bike, and then Bad to the Bone kicks in, and he's putting on the sunglasses. That is just that is Terminator. Um, that scene, the mall scene, where you realize it's a sort of moment of realization where Arnie is the good guy in this film because he tells John to get down. And the third one is towards the end, um, where you see the T1000 in its full sort of chromatic visual. He's not got the disguise on. He's just been like basically blown up, and he's just in that sort of visual now. You see it for its true form, essentially.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with you. The true form is a big moment that goes with it, and I think that's important with this film is that you've not earned seeing it, but it's important, right? You want because it did it in the first one. You want to see them do it again. You want to see that mask like slowly coming off, no matter how
Mm.
hypothetical it is. It just adds so much more, and kind of segueing into my final thoughts on the film. It's quite easy to sit here and call it a masterpiece because it is, but it probably sits at the top of the tree of the action genre. That
Yeah,
the one I compare the closest, maybe in terms to stature, acclaim, accolades. You've probably got Mad Max Fury Road, which is
yeah,
unbelievable. Two very, 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 very different films.
yeah,
But its place in pop culture is there, and I genuinely think that although we love the first Terminator film, that in turn is elevated because of how good the second one is. They
mm.
complement, like when we did the Aliens review, we spoke so highly that Aliens complements Alien and vice versa. They bring each other up. That's how I feel the two Terminator films
Yeah,
have come in at. And that without those, they're not going to be spoken. They'll just be another generic franchise, but they're
mm.
not, and they're not that because it is James Cameron that's made them the way they are. So
Yeah,
that's my final thoughts, because we've spoke wonderfully on this for over an hour, and
yeah.
I always run out of the superlatives to keep talking them. But what are your final thoughts on Terminator 2 Judgment Day?
I think, yeah, watching it yesterday, I just realized how good it is. But there is one thing that I'd like to mention that we skipped
Yes,
over is the alternate ending.
what's the ending? Go for it.
So I only realized there was an alternate ending a couple of years ago. To be honest, I just came across it on YouTube. I can't remember how, but it was just there. And I'd so the alternate ending, for anyone that doesn't know, is it's a set in the future. They've prevented Judgment Day. Skynet isn't a thing, and it's Linda Hamilton playing with her grandkids outside the Congress building, and it's Linda Hamilton's inner monologue saying that John is still fighting on the front lines, but he is a congressman now, so he's fighting against the AI in a very different way. So he's not a soldier in the sort of way that he was meant to be, but he is still fighting that fight. And
Yeah.
I think that is such a good bookend for the two films. If you took that as the original ending, I wouldn't be mad, because then at that point it invalid. Even though the sequential films after T2, they're not bad, they're okay, but you can tell they're dwindling and they're running out of ideas. If you put that as a bookend for one and two and disregard number three and however many more there are, I'm perfectly happy with that. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that.
No. It's a very good thing, because I think it's pretty important moving forward that James Cameron wanted that ending. That's the
Mm,
ending that he filmed with them. That's what he wanted. The studio wasn't happy. Well, I say it's not technically studio, is it? The rights holders weren't happy with the
mm,
ending. It didn't test well with audiences. It seemed too perfect, too nice. Um, and kind of in line with that, that's why we have the ending we have, which is a bit more open. But we sit here 30 years later and we joke about how many bad Terminator films there's been
mm,
since. Imagine a world where, not that it ended at two, it would have been rebooted, but
yeah,
luckily its reputation has not been damaged by the films that followed it. But in
mm,
turn, knowing that scene exists, there's a bit of peace in there that
yeah,
that at least, James Cameron's not directed one since. It doesn't matter that he can endorse Genesis. It doesn't matter that he's involved in Dark Fate. His original ending was to end it with the second film,
yeah,
and part of me wishes. Or we might have had old James Cameron popping out saying, you know what, guys, I'm going to make 5 Terminator films for the next 30 years,
yeah,
like he's doing with Avatar. So it's one of those.
yeah. I think for me that is the alternate ending is a canon ending, um,
Yeah,
because then it doesn't, even though it doesn't like the three onwards doesn't invalidate the greatness of number two, it has that sort of negative impact on it, because especially in the future, if you go to a kid in that's what 10 or 11 now and tell him to watch the Terminator films in 7 years time when he's legally of age to be able to watch them because they're all 18, um if he watches it one, two, three, Genesis, Dark Fate, I think that's the order, um he's gonna go to number 1 and 2, and then he's gonna have to watch number 3, 4, and 5, and think, okay, it started off good, it got better, and then it's just this massive decline in quality. So I think if they would have had it at the time, and they like, yeah, we've got 2020 hindsight that the next films weren't great, so you could have had that as a canon ending. But yeah, it's one of those ones.
No, definitely. I'm glad you brought it because I did forget to put that
Yeah,
next, and I would spoke about it, and I'm glad you didn't appreciate that. And I think that just it just to me overhangs everything else that followed, and sort of just to echo myself again. I'm just glad that this film's good enough to not be affected. You know,
yeah.
there are some films, and I'm not going to say the obvious one.
Star
I know
Wars.
we spoke about where it's like, you know, this is the James Cameron series, but you
Yeah,
know, you can have it where, you know, to me, and you know, there's going to be people that grow up with the one I dislike,
yeah,
and there'll be kids that are 10 years, 15 years younger that love the one I don't, which is fine,
mm,
and I'll have peace with that. Like our prequel generation grew up, and everyone older than
yeah,
us hated it and gave us shit. So it's one of them where I'm glad I don't have the affection to Terminator because
mm,
I couldn't imagine. I mean, it'd be a lot worse than Star Wars, right? Like, oh my god, James Cameron's endorsed this one. Oh,
yeah.
it's even worse. James Cameron's helped do the
Right,
story
the
for the
film.
next
Yeah,
one. So you know, I think we'll probably end up getting Terminator again one day in the future. I know they did the
yeah.
not Sarah Jane. That's a very different thing.
Sarah Connor.
I know they did the Sarah Connor series, starring Lena Headey, which I remember was meant to be decent when it aired at the time.
Yeah,
But I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, Disney have the rights, I believe, now, or whoever it ended. The rights for things like Terminator and Aliens is madness. Predator as well. They're
yeah,
probably all at Disney somewhere because I know that they're all streaming. Well, some of them are streaming on Disney Plus, but it does make me think that if Terminator was to come back, and I don't want to hype off it because it sort of takes away from being a James Cameron retroactive thing, but if Terminator was to come back, do it as TV.
yeah,
Um, and do Terminator Salvation because they had the right era,
yeah,
they had the right cast members who've all gone on to do pretty much great things.
yeah.
It's
Well,
just that
Sam
the execution,
Worthington, yeah, is
yeah,
in
Sam
Avatar. Yeah,
Worthington, Christian Bale, Bryce Dallas Howard directs now. You
yeah.
know, I think people would have naturally wanted to have seen a Terminator film set during the actual,
The
you
actual
know,
war. Yeah,
apocalypse. Yeah, so you know, not that they'll be listening, but if Terminator were to return, I think I'd like to see it as a series, but
mm,
maybe something different, something just completely different.
yeah,
Not reboot, not the exact same timeline, but maybe you want to spend a bit of time in a war in the future. Go for it. But
yeah,
you know, there's a reason that I'm not, and the last films have bombed
yeah,
pretty horrifically, which I think even James Cameron said it's down to the fact that people just don't care anymore. They've been oversaturated
mm,
with the same false promise of it's Terminator 3 4 times in a row.
yeah,
But and enough of me mocking Terminator 3 Part A, B, C, D, and E. We want to hear from you. So please do comment below with your thoughts on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Maybe your thoughts on what we just spoke about with the future unknown, or maybe you like the other Terminator attempted threes. Would like to hear that from you. So please do get involved. I'm going to watch Terminator Dark Fate. I'll watch it over the next week. Why not watch something? There's a lot of Oscar films to watch. I'll chuck in a few blockbusters along the way. And go follow us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema savvy, and a link to Redbubble where you can pick up some merch in the description if you want to help support the channel. But the James Cameron retrospective will be returning. Next week, we arrive at another Arnold Schwarzenegger film, a classic in its own right, starring, for some reason, Academy Award nominated Jamie Lee Curtis for Everything Ever All at Once, who I don't know why she's nominated for that role. As you can tell, the Oscar nominations did stay still pretty fresh. We're going to be reviewing True Lies. So that's going to be a very fun one. We've got something that's never been on the channel before, which I'm excited to bring on. I cannot wait to record that. I've not seen the film in a very long time. And it's very exciting to be talking True Lies on the channel. So we'll be back on Wednesday, the 8th of February with that. And kind of in turn of that, looking ahead, this is a smaller series, and the series is almost done. We've got True Lies next Wednesday, the 8th. Then we're going to be live on Sunday, the 12th, with our big Titanic review, following on from its big 4K 3D remaster release at Cinemas and IMAX. So 2 more episodes. This series will be done. We'll be fully into Oscar season, Oscar hype. Last of Us is happening every Monday, which is amazing so far at the time of recording. Ayman, I know you've not seen it yet.
No.
I've seen the whole series. I love reminding people that in an unfortunately smugly way. I'm just very blessed that I've seen that series this early because I love the game. So there's a lot of things happening on the channel. It's very busy, but most importantly, thank you for coming on tonight, for taking time out of
No
your
worries.
schedule to join
Thank
me.
you for having me. I
I'm
always have
glad we
fun
could
when
get
I'm
you
on.
on this. I know you wanted
Yeah.
T2, so I was like, we'll get you on T2. And I appreciate that. And to everyone at home, thank you for watching. As we always do, it does mean a lot, and any feedback and support really does help the channel move forward. So that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you all for watching. See you on the next one.